Beginning the story of the Jewish people with Parshas Lech Lecha is a big break point in the narrative of the Torah. Because the Torah goes from being focused on the history of mankind, creation, the entire generation of Noah, the dividing of the people into nations of the world. It's encompassing in nature. And now, exactly beginning it with the third parsha of Lech Lecha, the Torah narrows its focus to the Jewish people. And what we're going to try to do tonight is we're going to focus on Abram, which was his name at this stage of his life that we encounter him, not Abraham yet, because his name was changed later. And I wanted to, the title of the class is Abram Solving the Puzzle, to look at the Torah text and rabbinic insights to get to the heart of the founding father of the Jewish people. And of course, getting to the heart, I mentioned at last week's class, the quote from Nehemiah that God, Matzata et levavo ne'eman lefonecha, that God found his heart trustworthy, believing, whole and complete with him. So that's a highlight. So, but I want to really reach back to a sense of biography. And the Torah doesn't really aim to do that. And therefore the Torah leaves us to sort of put the puzzle pieces together. But, reading biographies was deemed to be a very important thing once upon a time when I was a kid, because you learned about how people's lives worked out, how they created meaning, how they found their way in the world, and a little bit about what makes them tick. And then a person could either learn from their negative example ideas not to implement, or from their positive example ideas to hold on to. So let's sort this out a little bit, and let's aim to create an accurate narrative. But I just want to say that every biography is different. There are two biographers can look at the same material, read the same writings, look at the same person and interpret their lives very, very differently. So this class is not meant to be the one and only manner of being introduced to Abram's life, but it's an approach, and I hope you take it that way. So first of all, like the Wikipedia of Abraham, the cold facts, as they say. So Abram was born in the month of Nisan in the Hebrew year 1948. It's easy to remember that because, lo and behold, in our calendar, 1948 is the year, that in the Common Era that Israel was founded. And in the Hebrew year 1948, 1,948 years after creation, Abraham was born. It's 3,835 years ago from today. But the better way to pinpoint it is that Abram was born exactly 500 years before the Jewish people experienced the exodus from Egypt. So what we're going to accomplish in this whole book of Bereshit, which brings us to the point where the Jewish people descend down to Egypt, is we're really going to look at a period of around 300 plus or minus years. And during this time, the Jewish people were founded. Now, other facts about Abraham's life, some of which are written in the Torah and some of which have to be computed, as Rashi often does, is that Abraham died 175 years after he was born, at that age, which was 15 years after Jacob and Esau were born. So that's jarring because the Torah doesn't work the narrative out that way. We sort of leave Abraham behind and then focus on the life of Yitzchak, and then we leave Yitzchak behind and we focus on the lives of Yaakov primarily and his relationship with his twin brother Esau. But the fact of the matter is that Abraham's life, Abraham lived to see two twin grandchildren born to his son Isaac. Other things which are not written into the Torah, but a fact is that how old was Abraham when the Tower of Babel took place and the peoples of the world were dispersed, something we read about in last week's Parsha. So if you do the math, Abram was 48 years old when God mixed up the languages and reorganized the world into 70 nations. So the concept of nations and differentiating people took place during Abraham's life. And there's a lot of significance in that. We're not going to deal with it too much today. But if you give thought to the idea of quote unquote, not quote unquote, the fact of a chosen people, the fact of the Torah focusing on the history of the Jewish people almost exclusively from now on, it makes sense that God divided the nations of the world up into 70 nations classically, and that Abraham was 48 at that time. And according to Maimonides' chronology and others, when he was 52, meaning 4 years after the people of the world were spread out into 70 distinct nations, exactly in the Hebrew year 2000. He was born in 1948, so 52 years later would have been the Hebrew year 2000. Abram began teaching everyone he met about belief in God. And therefore, by tradition, Abraham simply, his conviction and his activity in teaching the world about God, about one God, about the God that we understand through the lens of the Torah and Jewish tradition, Abram thereby ended what was deemed to be 2,000 years of tohu vavohu, of void, of emptiness in the world. Why do we say that? There are a lot of great people. Adam was a great person. Noah was a great person. A lot of important things had taken place. But the world had a purpose. And the purpose was, as laid out in the Garden of Eden, for people to build relationships with God directly. And hence, Abraham, at the age of 52, setting out to open the world's eyes to belief in God and understanding how belief in God can and should shape human behavior, shape our actions, shape the way we deal with one another, be all-encompassing, defining. Abraham publicly emerging as that person, that ended 2,000 years of void. And now, in a certain sense, you could imagine, so to speak, God Almighty in the heaven rubbing his hands together and says, okay, now bring it on. Now we've got something going here. And that's the wiki facts of Abraham's life. And we're only going to encounter him this week's Parsha at the age of 75, the 23 years after those activities began. And we're going to see that when he leaves, he has an entourage. He has hundreds, thousands of people who are in his camp, traveling with him. And those are the souls that he made during his sojourn in Haran, because those are the people he impacted and inspired and who joined together with him under this big tent of belief in God. So that's the stage that we're looking at. Now, let's begin looking at the text a little bit. Just a quick contrast. If you turn to page 30 in the Stone Chumash, which is the beginning of Parshas Noach, we get something very dramatic. Page 31 in English, it's Genesis chapter 6, sentence 9. These are the offspring of Noach. Noach was a righteous man, perfect in his generation. Noach walked with God. Noach had sons, Shem, Cham, and Yafes. The Torah gives Noach a rousing introduction. Okay? Wow. Let's fast forward in the Torah to page 54, which is the beginning of this week's Torah reading, Lech Lecha. It's on page 54, 55 in the Stone Chumash. And here's what it says. Hashem said to Abram, Go for yourself from your land, from your relatives, and from your father's house, to the land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and those who curse you I will curse. And all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you, shall become enriched and bettered by you. Who are we talking about here? Who's Abram? Can't we spare a few words to say he was a tzaddik, like we talked about Noah? He walked with Hashem. He was tamim. I mean, some of these words are used about Abraham later on in the Torah. But when the Torah introduces Abram to us, it's just, Vayomer Hashem el Avram. God said to Abraham. Now, this can be misleading. And indeed, certain what we would call fundamentalist religious people have this idea that you put yourself in a frenzy and God just comes to you out of the blue, talks to you, gives you a message, you start speaking in tongue, whatever the deal is. And I guess perhaps people look at this section of the Torah and they think that must be what happened. Abram must have been like a regular guy. But we know, just from the wiki facts we had before, that he already had a 23-year-long campaign of passionately teaching others convincingly to put aside idolatry, to commit themselves to a view of one God who you can have and should have and are required to have a relationship with, one God whose viewpoint should be the greatest authority in your life. And that's an interesting way of thinking about religion in general, that God, you seek out God's viewpoint and God's perspective becomes most important to you in all your decisions and in everything you do. And that's the way it works. Now, of course, we have midrashim and legends and things that are alluded to in the Torah, such as the most famous incident that Abraham broke the idols in his father's house, Terach's house. Terach turned him over to Nimrod. Nimrod put him on trial. He was given an opportunity to adopt idolatry and cast aside his ridiculous view of one invisible God. He refused to do so. He was thrown into a fiery furnace and he emerged unscathed. And that's really alluded to at the end of Parshas Noach, those last sentences right before in chapter 11, just before this. And there's a lot of significance there. Rabbi Foreman, I think, has interesting insights into the fact that Avraham and his brother Nahor each married the daughters of their deceased brother, which means that they were selfless in their choice of a marital partner for life and choosing someone so that they could propagate the name of their dead brother, just like we have the Yibum laws, which come up later in the Torah. A lot to think about, but it is remarkable that Abram gets no direct introduction, and it's such a contrast to what came before. So I want to pull something out of the hat here and say something which needs to be understood, and it can't be understood on its face, but let's put it on the table. Let's put a puzzle piece on the table. The Maharal comments on a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. In Pirkei Avot, in Ethics of the Fathers, chapter 5, usually Mishnah 19. I'm sorry, Mishnah 16 says the following idea. There's two types of love. There's love that is dependent on something, and that kind of love is fragile and frail, because when the thing it depends on dissipates, the love ends. And then there is love, a higher level of love, an eternal level of love, which the Mishnah says is not dependent on anything. And in an interesting discussion that Rabbi Breitowitz put online from Israel, Eliezer Breitowitz, Rabbi Breitowitz was in Israel, put online just the other day. we have to give it all thought. What does it mean to have love that's not dependent on anything? Is it again a lightning strike out of the blue? Like the movies. I was driving my car down the street, and all of a sudden I jam on the brakes, and I see someone. I say, "Wow, I love that person. I don't know who they are. I don't know anything about them, but I have a tremendous love, and it's not dependent on anything. It just struck me." No, I don't think so. So the fact of the matter is, an understanding of love, which is not the topic of tonight, includes the idea that there's progressions of love, and that yes, two people like each other because they both root for the Philadelphia Phillies. Two people like each other because they're physically alike or admire the appearance of the other. If people are of different genders, there's obviously the room for physical attraction between the two people. But what the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot is explaining to us, that as love roots itself within a person, and there's a progression of love, and as love really becomes a soulful connection, then even when those very factors that germinated this love and that it was built upon fall by the wayside, the love continues. Because the love has a genuineness to it. It has a depth to it. It has a heartfelt quality to it. So the Maharal Miprag says that the Torah is telling us something emphatically here in sentence 12 by giving no introduction to Avram. Now again, we know from Jewish tradition, just by looking at the timeline, this is a man who out of the blue, without God ever talking to him, without any prophecy, without any confirmation whatsoever, spent the last 23 years of his life swimming upstream, risking everything to explain to people that there's a God and that kindness is an imitation of God, and compassion and being slow to anger, and that God is loving and life is precious and life is an opportunity. And these were iconoclastic ideas. They were jarring to the political leaders of the time, who rooted their power on their dominion, on their physical dominion over the world. So hence a Pharaoh who derives his power and authority from being the master of the Nile River over the Egyptian people, and that feeds them and gives them sustenance in their mind. And that's where it all begins and ends. So idolatry becomes critically important for the maintenance of power. So a Jew, an Abraham in the midst of Egypt, is going to be problematic because he's challenging the world order. He's challenging where authority comes from. That's what happened with Abraham, with Nimrod, when probably before they built the Tower of Babel. So what we see going on here is that God is saying, here's Avram. I came to him and I told him, hit the road. I want you to go to a special place. I'll show you the place. I want you to grow and develop so that you become the linchpin of humanity, so that people will see you for who you are, a blessing to the world, a human being who makes it all worthwhile and who forges a path for all of us to learn from and follow. This biography needs to be the #1 bestseller in the world, because your biography, Abram, is going to be the biography that's going to open people's eyes and inspire them through your example, through your philosophy, through your thinking, through your commitments. It's going to inspire the world. So what God is saying here, according to the Maharal, is my love for Avram, when he hits the age of 75, has reached such a depth, such a soulmate, so to speak, love between God Almighty and between this man, Avram, and his wife, Sarai, for all that they stand for all that they've done, for their commitment and their actions in trying to rectify a world, trying to achieve tikkun olam, to use a phrase that we use nowadays. Torah doesn't use it here. So God it's Avram. I don't need to tell you anything about him. I don't need to say, yeah, I think he's cute. I don't need to say, I like his clothes, I like his style, I like the music he listens to. I don't need to tell you anything. I don't need to tell you he's a tzaddik. I don't need to tell you he walks with God. This is Abram, my beloved, my soulmate. So the Torah records, I told Abram, go for yourself, leave the land, leave your relatives, leave your father's house. I'm going to show you a special place to live, because and so that we can carry forward on the progression of the world. So what the Maharal says with audacity is that the reason that Noah has an introduction and Avram does not have an introduction is because Avram had already earned an eternal connection to God that didn't depend on anything. Now, we won't go into the discussion, if there are limits to a parent's love to a child, albeit those limits should be very far out there. We can't really imagine this. But I want to tell you something, as a Jewish person reading this text and wondering, why by Noach does it say each tzaddik, haya, v'tarasav, tamim, he walked with God, and by Avram it just says Avram. God spoke to Avram because God wants to know, I'm speaking to you, Jewish people today, 2022, 3,835 years later. This commitment and association and connection carries forward. It carries forward through all the generations of time. There's a preciousness, Imagine a person meeting a great-great-grandchild that he's never seen before. Just knowing that this person is my great-great-grandchild. I love him already. I don't know anything about him. I don't know who he voted for in the last election. I don't know who he's going to vote for next Tuesday. But I know I love him because he's my family. I'm connected to him. That's what the Torah is conveying to us. It's a very inspiring thought. And it's inspiring not so that we can feel better than, but that we can understand that if we feel that we're encountering this section of the Torah and it's remote to us, because after all, how much have we towed the line? How devoted are we? How connected are we to the example that Abraham set? We can push all that stuff aside. We're descendants. God expresses such an eternal attachment here. And that's what the Maharal teaches us, that's what the Torah is teaching us. And that's why when we begin learning about the life of Avram, we have to feel super associated. And there's many other reasons why we should be associated with it. We say every day in the prayers, Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. We refer to God. We designate God as the God of Abraham. Also an audacious thought to think about, because God certainly was feeding all the other people in the world, and he was clothing them, and the sun shined for everybody, and the rain fell for everybody, and God sustained all mankind. But there's some particular connection here, an inalienable connection, which the Torah puts down as the first placeholder as we progress in learning about Avram's life. And now I want to go on and create a little tension, and we're going to solve it with another source. If you were asked, Abraham is the paragon of blank, fill in the blank. So most people would say faith. He introduced monotheism, which isn't absolutely correct, because he's going to encounter people who are monotheistic in the narrative itself. And the term God, as used in the Torah, is a cogent term for other people in the text. Even later on, when he speaks to the king of the Philistines, and he says there's no fear of God in this place, that bothers the king. So God was not obliterated from the world. but you could say faith, commitment, basing a life on belief. That's Abraham. Pirkei Avos, again, I think we can say, points us in another direction, not mutually exclusive, but one that we could think about fitting in here. Pirkei Avot, it says in chapter 5, Mishnah 19, Kol mi sheyesh biyado shlosha devarim haro mitalmidav shel Avraham Avinu. Now, significantly in Pirkei Avot, other places it just refers to Abraham as Abraham, but here it refers to Abraham, our father, emphasizing that idea. So there are three traits, and as we see those traits within ourselves, as we develop those traits within ourselves, as we take this aspect of our nature and character seriously, we increasingly become students of Avram, associates attached to him, just like a student is to a teacher. Ayin Tova. Abram didn't begrudge anything to anybody else. He was truly happy for the success of others. Ruach Nemucha. Ruach Nemucha, and there are some nuances here of difference in different commentaries, but Avram was not a ravenous person. He wasn't out to make the Forbes 500 list. He wasn't intent on eating at every Michelin 3+ star restaurant in the world, or wearing the finest clothing, or being on the cover of Time magazine more often than anybody else. Even though, by the way, I think that's true. However, he had a sense that my self-interest is curbed and limited so as not to interfere with more important things. And I really want us to think when we get a chance about that idea of ruach. It's not a self-effacing, I don't deserve anything. Why should I buy a $4,000 suit for my kid's wedding? God, it'll give me an iron her and God will strike me down. No, Avram didn't feel that way. Avram just felt that I want my focus to be on what's most important in life. And what's most important in life is cultivating a relationship with God. I want to aim for the highest pleasures, which we know from writers like Ramchal, Ramoshe Chaim Lutzato, and Mesilat Yesharim. Association with God is pleasurable. Just like you tell a person, if you had a 6 o'clock appointment to eat dinner at a very fine restaurant with your friend, and you met your friend on the corner at 5:30, and you saw him wolfing down candy bar after candy bar after candy bar, and you said, Tom, what are you doing? We're about to spend $500 a piece for a meal. You're ruining your appetite. You're ruining your palate. What do you do? I just can't help myself. I just love Mars bars. And they were on sale for 5 for $1. And I bought 5 and I just can't wait till after dinner. I just got to eat them all now. So what would we say about that? We'd say, oh, what a happy person. What a fulfilled person. We'd say, Nebuch, he's pushing aside a unique, special experience, a gastronomic experience, to wolf down a few candy bars that he can access at any time, that are out of a much lower order of satisfaction, of nutritional value, whatever you want to look at it. So this is the idea of a ruach nemucha. Ruach nemucha means my spirit doesn't have the best of me. So that when I look in the world, I say, yeah, I would love to have a Mars bar now, but what am I, an idiot? At 6 o'clock, my friend and I are going to sit down. We're spending a lot of money. We want to eat a meal. I want to taste. I want to understand why this wine is, all the little nuances. I want it to be there. Why should I spoil my appetite and my palate right now for something of a much higher order? Get that idea of ruach nemucha. So in other words, that's where Abraham came from. He was in charge of himself, and therefore his spirit, his exuberance, his excitement about life was aimed at higher order things. He wasn't going to go sit in the front row of a rock concert a few hours before. He was going to listen to a famous violinist perform his favorite symphony, because maybe his ears will still be ringing, and he realizes how much more enjoyment he's going to get out of that symphony than he's going to get out of the rock concert. And whatever order you want to put them in is okay with me. So this is the idea. And the final thing is, Nefesh Shafoa, he wasn't full of himself. He wasn't arrogant. He didn't really feel he was better than everybody else. So when he related to other people, for example, when he encountered strangers, he was ready to serve them. He was ready to make a meal for them, people he didn't even know, invite them into his home, bring them the food, sit down, relax, enjoy a good meal. We'll talk afterwards. I have some ideas I'd love to share with you, about God, about idolatry, about the importance of life, about all these different things. But let's first eat. I really want you to enjoy. I want you to relax. I want to connect with you. So here's my my version of a Michelin 3-star restaurant in this little tent in the middle of no place, the best I can do. And it's all locally grown and sourced, so you could really enjoy it. So that's who Avram is. So I want to say, let's create a little tension here. There's the Avram who's inspired by belief in God to such an extent that God could feel about Avram that I have a love for you that's not dependent on anything. And by the same token, there's an Avram who is master of himself, who has an understanding that I'm going for the loftiest achievements of mankind, and I'm not going to sell myself short. Okay, I have a wife who's my soulmate, so I'm not going to be diverted from the intensity of that relationship. I want to develop that relationship because that's an eternal relationship that's going to impact the world and the future of the world. That's the sense of hierarchy. I want to interpret that. So which is it? So here I want to look at a famous medrash. It's in Bereshit Rabbah, chapter 39. It's really quoted in chapter 5 of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, of blessed memory's book, A Letter in the Scroll. And he has an interpretation there, which I respect. And he has also a different take on this, on the vision of the medrash. And I'm going to base this on a talk I heard recently from a Rabbi Yosef Katz, who's an Israeli mashkiach in a yeshiva and has a kollel, very fine person. And I happened to meet him in Beth Jacob this past Shabbos. And I listened to a shir of his online, and he had a certain insight here, which I really cherish. So let's look at this. And this medrash is talking about exactly what we're saying, where God appears and says to Abram, Lech lecha me'artzecha, seemingly out of the blue. So Rabbi Yitzchak says, to what may this be compared? This idea of Hashem spoke to Abram, go for yourself from your land. What's it comparable to? So he says, let's envision a parable. A man was traveling from place to place, and he passed by a palace, a castle, all aglow, all lit up, beautiful to behold. And that's where this understanding, according to Rashi's comment on the Medrash, is different than the way Rabbi Sachs reads it, which is fine. The person passing by thinks to himself, is it possible that this castle lacks an owner to look after it? Who built it? Who created it? Who decided what color the walls were going to be painted? Is that possible? And he went and he was contemplating the palace over and over again, looking at it. To such an extent, the owner of the palace sticks his head out the window and says, you're so interested in the owner of the palace. It's me. I own the palace. And Rabbi Yitzchak says this is what happened with Abram Avinu. Abram Avinu thought to himself, look at the universe. Look at its complexity. Look at it, how intriguing it is. It has to have not just a creator or a beginning point. That wasn't the essence of this. But it has to have a supervisor. It has to have someone who takes care, because look how every painting is in the right place and the choice of everything is so beautiful and so perfect. Look how the sun sets, and look how molecules reproduce themselves, and look how orderly the world is. And I'm going to look and look and look until I find the master of the universe. And then the Midrash says that Avram's looking aroused God. It actually caused a reaction in God. Look how sincerely he's looking for me. He's seeking God. He's seeking to understand and connect. And hence God said to Abraham, Lech lecha me'artzecha. This is Rabbi Yitzchak's vision, his understanding, the parable that brings it to life for him. This is what Abram, this is what the Torah is describing here. And Rabbi Katz in an interesting thing said the following. Let's take a normal person. You walk down the road, you pass a castle, okay? Castles are a palace. The door's open, you walk in. You look around, nobody's around, and you say, "Ooh, I like that artwork on the wall there. Maybe I'll take it home, keep it for myself." Let's go in the kitchen. Oh boy, it's all stocked with food. Oh, look at this fantastic fare that's available. I think I'm gonna, let me go back, get a couple of guys from my neighborhood. We're gonna empty the place out, and we're gonna live a good life. I'd love to have that artwork on my wall. I'd like to eat that food for myself. I have my own appetites to feed. And there's nobody around looking, so I think I'm going to take it all for myself. But Avram wasn't that way, because he didn't want the quick fix. His inclination had surpassed being just a taker and a user of the world, and a person who just looks for what's the next satisfying experience that I might be able to partake of. Where will I find honor? Where will I find gratification? All these other aspects of life that are discussed in Pirkei Avot. It's because Abraham was in such control of himself. It's because he was looking for, you could say, truth, you could say meaning. He was looking for a picture that really added up so that he could place himself within the world in a way that was very meaningful and satisfying for himself. So he said, the only way that can happen is if I figure out who owns this place, who owns it, not what I can take from it, not what I can have for myself. And hence, I think what emerges from this, and from these few minutes we've spent together looking at these sources, is a portrait of a person whose foundation is in self-control. Okay, who's a powerful, strong person? A person who's in control of his own nature. And being in control of his nature, every encounter in the world, every palace he saw, every wonder he encountered, every person he met with, he saw as an opportunity to enrich them, to connect with them, to serve God, and to make God the focal point of their connection. And hence we get a love between God and Abraham, which supersedes anything we could imagine. It has to supersede the way God felt about Noah. It has to supersede even the way God felt about Adam when he created Adam, because God babied Adam. He took Adam and placed him into the garden and made everything perfect for him. And Adam was purely a recipient. Abraham comes from a different place. Abram comes from a place of struggle. Abram comes from a place of seeing at the age of 48, the world literally falling apart and people being divided. and coming to an understanding that there has to be a plan for this. And in a way saying, ask not what I can take from the world or what I can take from life, but ask what life can offer me. And what he came to understand, what life can offer me is a connection to the master of the universe, to the owner of the palace, to the being that created everything, and I can directly live my life as in a loving friendship and connection. And hence, you just read the rest of the sentences. I'll make you a great nation. People can learn from you. I will bless you. Bless you. Why? You're not looking for better food or for more honor or for more physical satisfaction. So I can heap blessing upon you, and it'll just deepen a sense that you have of how fortunate you are to live in relationship with God. I'll make your name great, again, so people can learn from you. You shall be a blessing. Those people who bless you, who associate with you, who want to learn with you, they'll be blessed, they'll be elevated. And those people who curse you, who see you as a threat to their way of life, to their power structure, to their political power, to what they've carved out for themselves in the world, they'll curse you, and I'll have to curse them. This is what God lays out. This is the context of the beginning of Lech Lecha. This is a portrait of Abraham as a young man. Something I didn't. We're starting to put the puzzle pieces together in a way that's cogent, in a way that I feel is meaningful, and a way that we can truly be inspired ourselves in the way we live our lives. Happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Wonderful.
Okay, thank you very, very much. And everyone should have a wonderful week and a great Shabbos. And there's more good stuff in the Parsha if you get a chance to study it further.
And next week, Rabbi, is this Partners in Torah is part of the Shabbat San Diego study week. So hopefully
Great.
you'll be able to enjoy that.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you. We're excited to be part of Shabbat San Diego this week, this coming 2 weeks too. Thank you.
Thank you.
And everyone should have a great night. Thank you very much.
You too. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.